Hi everybody, this is Agnes from Sediment, and today we are going to blind taste Chablis Premier Cru to see whether they really offer great value. For me, Chablis, along with a handful of other Burgundy appellations, is one of the rare yet well-known names in the region that still offers great value at top quality. The fact that with few exceptions we can still find Grand Cru labels for under €100 is mind-blowing. I am aware that it is still a premium price, but the truth is we cannot find Grand Cru Burgundy for any less nowadays. I think I have mentioned it in some of my other videos that I believe wine in general now is of better quality than it has ever been. Not only there are various technologies that can help us, but also viticulturists and winemakers now have a better understanding and deeper knowledge of the interactions between the vine, soil, and climate. We also have better plant material, and with the growing focus on biodiversity and regenerative viticulture, we are seeing more balanced wines producing higher quality fruit and, as a result, better wine. Not all of us can continue to support our love for Burgundy, especially their top sites, the way we used to. So in the search for better value, some of us have started to explore more various Premier Cru vineyards. And terroir is not gone with the rise of technology. We still see that certain Premier Crus tend to perform better than others. Of course, human factor also plays role, meaning that a great winemaker has a potential to offer higher quality wine from a lesser known Premier Cru than a poor winemaker from a theoretically superior Premier Cru site. Sometimes it can also be due to historical factors. For example, a site had a potential to be classified as a Grand Cru, but for various reasons, it was never pushed for inclusion. So nowadays, we might recognize that some Premier Crus tend to outperform others. When I was just starting to study wine, I was taught that the best Chablis Premier Cru vineyards are those that continue from or are directly attached to the famous Grand Crus. And while that certainly makes sense and often is true, in Chablis specifically, it leaves us only with the Premier Cru sites on the right bank. You see, all of Chablis' Grand Crus are located on the right bank of the Seine River, but there are also great sites, great climat, on the left bank as well. In fact, some of my favorite Premier Cru of Chablis are located on the left bank of Seine River. Think of Vaillon and Mont. So I thought it would be interesting to do a blind tasting of some of the highly regarded Premier Cru Chablis wines and see how they perform against each other. Just for fun, I also decided to squeeze in one Grand Cru. To be honest, I do not only want to discuss the quality here, but also the stylistic differences. But I guess it would be interesting to see if some of these Premier Cru sites can actually challenge a Grand Cru label. And believe me, I have not made this easy. For Grand Cru, I chose maybe not the top producer of the region, but very reliable producer who makes style that I really enjoy. But now, let's taste. As always, these wines were poured by my cameraman, so I do not know which one is which. Let's start with wine number 1. I would want to say that this one shows typical Chablis nose. You have quite ripe, but at the same time really crisp lemon, lime, yellow plums, maybe some hint of lemongrass. There's also a lot of florals here, like orange blossom. Let's taste the wine. So this is quite interesting on the palate because the first sip that I took, it was filled with a lot of energy, with a lot of nerviness, that really high mouth-watering acidity. And then the ripeness of the fruit kicked in. Like, you do have all those yellow fruit, all those, kind of more restrained citrus fruit, but they're so ripe. They're really packed with a lot of flavors. And that also gives fuller, richer mid-palate here for the wine 1. It is very interesting, actually, because the village level Chablis and Tea Chablis are usually these really light-bodied and crisp styles. And when you move up to Premier Cru, or Grand Cru maybe in this case, so you kind of have a bit fuller mid-palate, fuller body, and much, much more texture and concentration here. Oh my. The intensity on the nose, it is also opening up here. It's like the yellow plum and maybe, you know, like white peach. It is just great. On the palate, you have this really high mouth-watering acidity, but it is balanced with this ripeness of the fruit. And the aftertaste is quite long as well, so I will give this wine 93 points. Let's move to wine number 2, which is actually much deeper in color than the wine number 1. Okay, so if we would have started our tasting with wine number 2, it would be very difficult for me to say in the blind tasting that this is Chablis from the nose alone, because we have much more dried characters here. So we kind of have dried orange peel or dried, you know, yellow plums, dried chamomile and white blossom, citrus peel a lot. Let's taste it. So on the palate, wine number 2 shows more vivacity. The acidity is more prominent. It seems much, much higher than wine number 1. And you kind of feel hints of white cranberry, maybe like really crunchy green apple. And what is interesting about wine number 2, it has a lot of texture. And texture in this case, it is not just, you know, acidity or body, but it kind of has like a mouth coating quality to it. Like maybe, you know, a bit more skin contact or, you know, lees aging here. It definitely shows a lot of texture. I think this wine represents a very unique style and winemaking of Chablis, and I will give this wine 91 points. Let's move to wine number 3. Okay, so this is another one that is quite deep in the color, if you can see it. And here we do feel really ripe, I would say opulent, like ultra ripe white yellow apple. If we felt like more green acidity, crunchy type of apple here in wine number 2, then this one is more white, yellow, reddish. We also feel a little bit of pear and maybe even white melon. So this might seem more tropical to you. Once again, the ripeness of the fruit here is absolutely beautiful and stunning, I would say. The acidity in this wine gives nerviness and energy. It kind of shows the youth of it, and youth not in a way that like age, but you know, youth in a way that it is powerful and it is filled with energy. And the fruit just wraps it in this beautiful blanket, leaving really balanced overall mouthfeel. If I want to be honest, on the nose, this wine seems to be over the top for me a little bit, like maybe like this really blousy and loud type of wine, which I don't necessarily always expect from Chablis. But on the palate, I enjoyed this wine a lot. So this wine seems to me kind of like this absolutely beautiful girl who maybe puts a lot of makeup, but in the evening when it is cleaned off, you still see the beauty. So it is beautiful inside and outside. I just guess it depends on the style which you like. I will give this wine 93 points. Let's move to wine number 4. Okay, so this one is really unique because on the nose, it shows a lot of that kind of skinned almond toastiness to it. It not necessarily means it is coming from oak, although at this level, Premier and Grand Cru, this is where you kind of start to see a little bit oak here and there in terms of élevage for Chablis. The village in Petit Chablis almost never sees oak. But there's also kind of semi-dried yellow plum On the nose, it is opening up quite beautifully, because at first I felt like that toastiness, that nuttiness maybe was overtaking the fruit. But once you converse with the wine, it slowly does open up. On the palate, we do have a lot of, similarly like in wine number 2, we do have a lot of texture here. We have really high, mouth-watering, marked acidity, which kind of would take you to a cool climate origin. So we are in Chablis. And there is really ripe fruit flavors all over it. So again, in wine number 4, we kind of see this really beautiful balance between acidity and ripeness of the fruit. Maybe it is not as well integrated within each other as we saw in other wines, but here they still like stand proudly next to each other and maybe fighting a little bit in this wine. I do enjoy the mid palate here for this label, because sometimes you feel the aftertaste more on the sides of your tongue, you know, or the back palate. But here it is on the mid, it's just so intense. I will give this wine 91 points. Okay, so now let's reveal the wines, and I will start with the lowest score wines, which I have 2. So 91, let's start. Daniel-Etienne Defaix, Chablis Premier Cru Vaillon. So we are on the left bank of Chablis. And by the way, if I may show you here or here, please note the vintage. And why am I saying this? Because this producer is notorious for releasing wines really late. And if you remember, I said in the blind tasting that I felt it represented a very unique style, and I remember I was talking about texture, so this might be reason why. So they age their wines quite long, they age on the lees, they sometimes do bâtonnage, so they have very unique style. Let's move to wine number 4, which I also gave 91 points. Okay, so this one is Thomas Pico, pas Loup. So this is 2018 vintage, and this one is Butteaux. I am sorry, I just remembered, did I mention that this was Chablis Premier Cru Vaillon? So this one is Butteaux Premier Cru, and if you remember in the introduction, I told you that I really like Mont, Maine. And if I'm not mistaken, Butteaux is actually a subdivision of Mont, Maine Premier Cru site. It is also located on the left bank of the Seine River. And this wine is 2018 vintage, so it means it is 7 years old. And very interesting, we see the total SO2 at the bottling and the free SO2 at the bottling. Very nice. Okay, so for those who are interested to have really open labels and labels they can study, this is it, Thomas Pico. Should we move to our top wines? So we have 93 and 93, and that means we have 1 Grand Cru and 1 Premier Cru scored very similarly. Let's move to wine number 1. So wine number 1 was my first wine of the day. I sometimes fear that I score wines that I taste at the very beginning too low, because, you know, the alcohol might seem a bit too harsh because it is your first wine. And sometimes wine number 1 or the first few wines can seem more like a calibration wines. They're just there to maybe, you know, wash your palate. And then you move towards assessing other wines and you kind of pay more attention maybe to other wines. So, but I scored this wine 93 points. I really enjoyed it. It was packed with a lot of freshness and lightness, a lot of fruit. Maybe it is something that I expected from Chablis. Okay, so Mont de Milieu, or the mountain in the middle of, or the middle mountain. Actually, this Premier Cru is on the right bank, so on the bank where all the Grand Crus are. And this is producer that I know nothing about. I've never seen it. Garnier Fills and 2022 vintage, so it was relatively young and fresh and zesty, which is exactly what I said on the blind tasting. And it really did represent this kind of typicity of Chablis that you expect, that high acidity, nerviness, fresh, vibrant fruit. It was all there. I did enjoy it. That leaves us wine number 3. Here is not a lot of surprises anymore. That leaves us with Michel Fills, Chablis Grand Cru Vaudesir. I love Michel so much. It is one of those producers who simply do not use any oak. And sometimes I don't mind oak. I actually do enjoy oak in my white wines. Not over oak, but you know, sometimes oak acts, it just helps to integrate all the flavors into the wine. And when it is masterfully used, it is really good. But this producer, Michel, he manages to make these really beautiful, I would even call them opulent and concentrated, really, really complex wines without any use of oak. And they never feel austere. They actually feel really complex, deep, intense. I'm always very happy with their wines. And it showed. So this is 2019 vintage. So all of the wines, except for wine number 1, which was 2022 vintage, already showed some maturity. And it is nice because we actually saw that Chablis can age and still hold the nerviness, still hold the fruit. Beautiful tasting, I think. And I do not want to say that this Premier Cru overpowered the Grand Cru, but they were playing in the similar leagues. And actually, all of these wines were playing in very similar leagues because they were all solid silvers. They were all really good wines. With all of these wines, we are in 90 plus points. And these two wines are twice as cheap as these two wines, I think. Michel is quite affordable when it comes to really good top producer. And Thomas Pico is kind of like a cult producer, and their Premier Crus are actually a bit higher in the price. Chablis is a place where you can still find amazing value for your money when it comes to Burgundy, when it comes to Chardonnay. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of Premier Cru. Do you have your own specific favorite Premier Cru site? It not necessarily has to be in Chablis. Maybe it is somewhere else in Burgundy. And if you want me to compare some of the Premier Crus versus Grand Crus, or some of the Premier Crus versus other Premier Crus and other tastings, I am very interested to hear your thoughts. And since I've been talking a lot how expensive Burgundy has become, make sure to watch my other video about 5 great alternatives to white Burgundy that totally deliver.